Hello, I'm Forrest and I've got a problem. Hello, everybody. I am noticing that I'm not noticing this. I noticed already that I have shadows going on with these glasses. It's probably been 2 episodes now. We'll get that corrected, but if you're watching online on YouTube, thank you for watching. Leave a comment. Do a little bit of rating and stuff. Much appreciated. Not enough of that going on. Leave a comment about my glasses. I don't care. And if you are new to the podcast, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of it. Please subscribe if you haven't. If you just stumbled upon it, subscribe it. Listen to it every week. Go back and listen to the other 41 episodes over time. Rate them. Join the conversation. And like I always tell people, I will never have ads on this podcast. But if you feel like donating money to somebody out there, a lot of noises on this one. If you feel like I always say, I will never have ads on this podcast, but if you feel like donating to help this podcast occur, be what it is, go to my website, forestshaw.net. That's Forrest with 2 R's. And on the podcast section, there's a little donate button there. While you're on my website, check out where I'm going to be. Got a lot of shows coming up. I believe this week I'll be in Winter Haven, Florida on the 20th. I think on the 19th, there's a holiday party. It's closed. I'm still performing, but you're not allowed to come there. So on the 20th, I'll be in Winter Haven, Florida. I skipped before that. On the 18th, I'll be in Celtic Ray at the Celtic Ray in Punta Gorda, Florida. The first place I ever made money doing comedy. I think it was $27. So I'm happy to be doing that show. Then I'll be in Tampa. I'll be at the Side Splitters in Wesley Chapel on December 26th. I think I'm going to have some other dates that are just going to pop up now. I might do some New Year's Eve shows and stuff too. And then I'll be in Marpesas. I don't know what that is, but it's outside of New Orleans, and I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. On January 3rd at Reno's. That's on my website as well. And then I got a bunch of other dates. I got Chicago. I'll be on the road with Jim Jeffries doing some dates. And then February 17th through March 1st, I'll be at the Howling Owl. I think that's what it's called. The Thirsty Owl. It's on my website. You should know this. It's for the Adelaide Fringe Festival. I'll be performing my new show, The Ocean Hates You, which is a marine biology comedy show. All the crappy stuff we've done to the ocean, pollution, acidification, climate change, overfishing. The ocean does not like us. The ocean hates it. Ocean hates you. I'll be, kind of debuting that show there at the festival. So if you're in Adelaide or nearby, come on out February 17th through March 1st. And then the week after that, I will be at the Comics Lounge in Melbourne. I'll just be doing a regular stand-up show March 3rd through the 6th, and then also, or it might be March 3rd, 4th through the 7th. It's on my website, forestshaw.net, but I'll also be doing the Ocean Hates You show as a solo show there as well. So I'll be promoting that better on the next podcast, but go to forestshaw.net. I got a bunch of shows after that as well. Vegas and Lake Tahoe, etc. Hey, Ernie. We got a pretty long podcast today. Not long, but we went a little bit longer than I usually make the podcast, so I'm just going to get right into it. My guest is Dr. Suzette Glasner. She is a professor at UCLA, and she's an addiction specialist. And she has her own podcast, and she was nice enough to do my podcast, and super knowledgeable, and really explained a lot of things that I wanted to know and questions that I had, and I think other people have, in such a way that it wasn't dumbed down, but it was digestible and easy to understand. And I appreciate her being here. I think you guys will enjoy this podcast. See you on the other side. My guest today is Dr. Suzette Glasner. She is an addiction scientist and UCLA professor, also an award-winning author and podcaster. Her research focuses on developing and studying psychotherapies for addiction and mental health conditions and making treatment more accessible through smartphone apps and social media. You can subscribe to Dr. Glasner's podcast on YouTube. I have a link there somewhere in all the stuff that I've written for the podcast, but it's drglasner.com. That's drglasner.com. I'm sorry, that's her website. I'm terrible at this. YouTube is Dr. Glasner as well. It's at Dr. Glasner. It's all the same. Dr. Glasner, drglasner. And also there's links on our website as well. So subscribe to our YouTube channel to learn more about addiction, mental health, and how to find a way through it all. And her latest book, Addiction, What Everyone Needs to Know, can be found on her website as well and on Amazon. Thanks for being here, Dr. Glasner. What's your problem?
Oh boy. Um, well, I'd say my problem is I am trying to be part of the solution to a very big problem, which is addiction. Um, I guess that's my problem, and it is my source of meaning and purpose. So, it's all balled into one thing that's both good and fulfilling and very challenging at times because it's a big issue, as you know.
Well, I'm happy that you are doing that and that there are other people like you doing similar thing, like trying to, um, yeah, I talk to addicts mostly in this podcast, but I come from a science background as a marine biologist in a former life. And so I like the fact that there are academics and people that are trying to help addicts and use science and learn about it and understand where things come from and why people are like this. And I think that helps people to get better and also to understand themselves and make sense of things. So I appreciate you and everybody else that does that, that is doing that. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is kind of like part of the problem and the challenge is coming from a science background. A lot of the time, we end up in rooms together with other scientists talking about the problem and the solution, and it's um, hard to extend our reach to the people who really need to understand the science and make it accessible. So I really appreciate what you're doing, because you're a big part of that. And people need to hear from experts and scientists more. But often experts and scientists don't have platforms like you and like the platform I'm working on building as well, just to break things down in a way that make them useful and not collecting dust in academic journals on shelves, that people in everyday life don't read or totally understand because they're so jargony.
yeah, just as I was talking to you, I have on my laptop, I never set this up, but I get notifications for news stories and stuff. And it just said, gambling scandal involving Shohei Otani's interpreter to be made into TV series. It's like,
Wow.
I was like, of course it is. This one of the most famous people in the world. They're not going to not make a TV series about that. But um, I also my problem is my lighting. I'm on the road. I'm not going to complain about it. All right, let's get into some questions. What actually, and if you don't know any of these answers, I hope you know them. But if you don't, then we'll edit it out.
I'll see what I know. I'll tell you everything I know.
'Cause these are like questions that I came up with that I was like, oh, these are things I want to know, kind of stuff. And so we'll see. What actually happens in the brain during addiction?
Ooh, okay. Addiction is like a lot of it is learned behavior. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit about genetics and where that all factors in and biology, but a lot of it is about learning associations between a drug or alcohol and the effect that it has. And you're sort of like forming these very powerful connections and memories, which is impacting your brain circuitry. Um, so I guess you could like take the example of like using a drug like stimulants like cocaine or methamphetamine or well, there's all kinds of stimulants. There's prescription stimulants as well. But what happens the first time you take a drug like that is that it triggers your reward system to release an unusually large quantity of dopamine, which is our brain's pleasure chemical. And and it's so much more dopamine than you would release normally, when you're doing something pleasurable. So, I mean, there are all kinds of, like, natural rewards in our environment that release dopamine, and I think we're all seeking that dopamine hit in one form or another because we wanna feel good, and we're wired to repeat things that feel good because a lot of those things are healthy and adaptive, like connecting with people, having sex, eating really good food, like, all those things trigger bursts of dopamine. But and from a survival standpoint, they should, because then we do all these healthy things that enable us to repeat those experiences. We get closer with other people. Um, you know, we develop longer lasting relationships and bonds. We work and do productive things so that we can put food on the table because we love the way it feels to eat certain foods. And, like it's all tied with motivation and motivation for healthy things. But when your brain releases this unusually large amount of dopamine, that forms a really powerful memory because it's like, wow, like I have not ever felt like this. Food doesn't make me feel like this. The normal stuff doesn't make me feel like this. So your brain is starting to get trained even from that very first moment to repeat that behavior if you want to feel that way again. The problem is that we only have so much of a dopamine supply in our brain. And what ends up happening over time when you repeat that behavior, and that is sort of the chasing the first high, it's a little cliche, but it's a real thing, as a person develops an addiction where they're wanting to feel that way again because it was so good and that memory was so powerful. And as they're trying to achieve that over and over again, dopamine's like getting depleted in our brain. So they have to work harder at it. They have to take more of it. They have to do it more often. And that's how the brain is like starting to learn to perform addictive behaviors. Because eventually, as that dopamine's getting depleted from your brain and your brain's capacity to produce dopamine is getting depleted, the ordinary things that used to make you feel good, like all those other things I mentioned before, don't really do what they used to do anymore. So your brain starts to orient to the most salient thing on your mind as far as a way of feeling good becomes the drug. And it becomes like kind of more important to you than all those other things that used to be your
Yeah.
go-tos for joy and pleasure. So that's sort of the brain transformation that's occurring. And then that also leads to a lot of your brain circuitry that's in control of healthy behavior is getting impaired because your reasoning and judgment and all of the kind of things that lead you to make decisions that are healthier and better for you, they don't really work the way that they were working before you became addicted to something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That was a really good explanation, I think, because even where you started, we had one of the earliest episodes on here. I was my friend Justin on, and we were looking at clips from My Strange Addiction, that show that I don't even know if it's on anymore. But there was a guy that was addicted to riding his bike, and because we were talking about, are there any good addictions?
Hmm.
And and we were like, oh yeah, riding your bike's got to be a good addiction. It's exercise, but it clearly wasn't for this guy. It impacted his life in a negative way, where he was just working on his bike and he wouldn't do anything. He would be on his bike the whole time, you know. But it does. But I guess, I mean, at least is what I was hearing. Is like it comes from a place of something that your body or your brain's doing to help you. Like initially, yeah, and then it's interesting. Um, and that makes sense to me too because I I do remember that. I've talked about it before. I remember gambling when I was a kid, like playing cards with my grandfather on my dad's side, and just how important that was to me, like how much I liked that, and I wanted to keep doing it, and it was for nothing. It was for matchsticks, but it was still something. And so, yeah, thanks, Grandpa. Started at a young age. It's his fault. I'll blame him. He's passed away.
Do you feel like you liked like the thrill of winning in the game, or was it more about doing something with him, or was it all of that?
Um, interesting. I would say definitely. I liked doing it with him. I still like playing things like I just learned a new card game, Canasta. I don't know if you've played Canasta ever.
No.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. I don't even know what we looked up the origin of it because I was asking, but um, it's just a card game, and I learned with some friends, family friends that I've been staying with when I've been down here in Florida for a while, and I just like the I like the social aspect of it, and that's one thing I do like about gambling, for sure, is I like being alone when I'm gambling, but I like being around other people. So like alone, like not being near people. I don't want to be with people that I know. At least for me, like I don't want because I'm a complete degenerate, and the amount that I'm gambling is like would be shocking to be. I think people are always like, "Oh yeah, no, I gamble a lot too," and I'm like, hold on. Like, I don't think you know what you're talking. So I like to be by myself, but if I'm at a table with other people, because I'm a comic and I can, hold a conversation. So I will be like, hey, I'll be like the life of the party at that table.
Yep.
And so I do like that social aspect of it for sure, especially when you're winning too. But, for me, winning is just about getting more money so I can keep gambling. It's not about the actual act of, I have friends that gamble or people that know have gambled and like, I sat down on a slot machine and then I won $600 and I only put $20 in, and that paid for the rest of our trip. And I was just like, I would have been like, no, for me, that would have been hours more of gambling. I wouldn't have paid with anything for it. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but,
It's on another level. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, that's interesting you asked that because I think there is a social aspect to it that I like too, which I think drinkers do. I
Mhm.
think people that use drugs do. I think that's but you want to be by like-minded people that I think at least that aren't going to judge you.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then I
Um,
think, like, for some people who I've worked with, the point of transition where they recognized that it was really becoming a problem was when they were wanting to do it alone.
yeah. 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 And I mean, and in reality, I was always doing it alone. I just would surround myself. Then I started off sports gambling. It's like mainly sports gambling. And that's I would be alone a lot in that. And then when I got into casinos, you're surrounded by people, but nobody's really, there's some people that come with their friends there, but a lot of people come alone. Because when you're
Mhm.
walking in, you can see you're in the parking garage or you're in the elevator, and it's a lot of people by themselves. And there's a lot of the same old rhetoric in an elevator, like, oh, hey, you feeling lucky tonight or whatever. And you're just, the elevator back is not exciting. The elevator back to the parking garage is usually a lot of people just talking to themselves, questioning what they did, just like, oh man, I shouldn't have done. So yeah. Um, do
It can
you
be like a lonely it can be a lonely illness when
yeah.
you're addicted to it. Yeah.
And I think as to what you were saying too, people that you've talked to, I think most addictions end up that way, right? I mean, that's yeah. Um, do you think addiction is more of a mental disorder or mental condition? This is a big one on my podcast that we talk about.
A disorder or a medical condition or a disorder or a condition? Wait, tell me the
Um,
question.
I guess maybe I didn't write this question right. Like, is it like because there's sometimes people say that, oh, it's like having cancer or diabetes or something, like it's an
Mhm.
illness,
Mhm.
versus like um it's a disorder that you have developed in your brain that you like. Some people say you could avoid it. Like some people don't believe that this is an illness, is what I would say. I
I
kind of
see.
believe it. Yeah. I don't know. Does that make sense? Maybe this is a bad question. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad question. Yeah, I just wanna make sure I know the distinction for between illness and condition the way that you're thinking about it. Um, okay, I probably have, like, 2 answers to that. So one is I'm convinced it's an illness, not much different from other chronic illnesses like cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, because there's been so much research that has shown that sort of the clinical course of addiction is not dissimilar to these other chronic conditions. Like the relapse rates when treatment is removed are similar. So and that makes sense to me because if somebody had diabetes or if somebody had hypertension and you treated it with medication, and then one day you said, okay, I'm just gonna take that away. Let's see how you manage. You'd expect their blood sugar is gonna go back up or their blood pressure is gonna go back up, unless there's something really powerful that they were able to do, lifestyle wise to change it. Um, but usually people are started on medication for these types of things, um, are are at a point where the lifestyle and behavioral options aren't enough. So not only do we see those similar relapse rates, but there's also like pathology involved, you know, in diabetes and cardiovascular disease, like from a biophysiological perspective, there's pathology. And even though people with addiction don't start with the pathology to the brain necessarily, that's chronic substance use leads to, the way that chronic substance use over time affects the brain, just like we were talking about in your first question, as far as it altering the reward system and altering your capability to make sound and good judgments and good choices and healthy choices, and sort of impacting your ability to control your impulses. Like this all develops once you cross a certain threshold of substance use, in terms of like how chronic, how frequent. And it's different from person to person, but not everyone who is exposed to an addictive substance ends up developing an addiction. Just like we see sort of like heritability of um cardiovascular disease and diabetes also have strong genetic ties, but not not everybody with a family member who has this also develops it. So like as far as the risk factors, the combination of environment, genes, personal experiences and vulnerability, we see that across all these different types of diseases. Um, and the sort of need for ongoing management of addiction is something that we've learned over time, is that most people need some kind of ongoing touch point or something. It doesn't mean that they have to be in intensive treatment for their entire life, but it's something that kind of need to keep in check in order to prevent from slipping or relapsing. That's the same with all these other illnesses as well. Um, so, I mean, those are some of the reasons. There are others. There's the way that people respond to medications for addictive behaviors that actually alter the way that they're experiencing responding to reward. So, like some of our most effective medications, and not everybody even knows that there's medications for alcoholism, but there are. Some of our most effective medications actually blunt the sort of rewarding response that you feel when you drink alcohol, and that helps people stop drinking alcohol. So just by deduction, like if your reward system is somewhat impaired when you chronically use a substance, and then you can take a medication that modifies your reward system's response to that substance and it helps you get better, that's even more evidence that it, it, you're dealing with an illness that's not much different from other chronic diseases.
Well, that was the answer I wanted you to give, so I'm glad you did. But that's what I think. But I come from a science background, so I'm always like, yeah, but I can't say it like that. So, and just because it is, trust me. I had another question here, like, why do some people become addicted and others don't, even with similar life experiences? But you just explained that pretty much, or you alluded to it at least, So
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that because it's so complicated. You can take two people have the same. First of all, we have genetics is a big part of it because studies have shown that our vulnerability to developing addiction is like 40 to 70% of it is impacted by genetics. So that's pretty strong. But I've worked with people who say there's nobody in their family who had addiction that they know of, and they still developed addiction. So there's more to it than that. The genetics are definitely kind of a setup, and you have to be like extra careful if you have first degree family relatives who have struggled with this. But even in the absence of that, there's all these sort of personal factors that make people more vulnerable. So one of them is mental health difficulties. And like you can kind of imagine why that would be is like, you know, people start using substances for different reasons. Some people love feeling good and they just want to like find ways to feel good, maybe like more of a thrill seeker type or something like that. But some people are using substances to feel better from something. So, you know, mental health problems, depression, anxiety, just as examples. But trauma is also a big one. There's a strong connection between early traumatic experiences and developing substance use. So those are some of them. But the others are also age is really, really influential. Um, like there's a window of time when people are especially vulnerable, like in adolescence and young adulthood. And depending on what happens in that window of time, it can really kind of
Mm.
set them up for better or worse. And part of that is just because their brains are still developing, and so, like, those very functions that get messed up by addiction, like being able to make good judgment and resist impulses and all of that, they're not fully developed when you're a teenager. So then you start taking a substance that starts messing with those systems, you just get addicted more easily. So I think the statistic um, is it 45% of people who start, um drinking or using substances before they're 14, um, will develop some kind of substance issue later on, versus if you wait until you're, like, 21, that drops to, like, 10%.
Really?
Mhm.
Oh, so I can't blame my grandfather. That's what you're saying. I mean, he's not up with us anymore, so it's okay. But I did want to blame my dad, but he didn't. I didn't even have him growing up. I had him on. Um, was on here on this podcast. He passed away as well, but I thought he told me he had a gambling addiction, but then he said I didn't. You know, it was a thing, and there was no other. I think maybe somebody else in my family was an alcoholic, but it's never. When I say confirmed, they never. Nothing they ever came to terms with, at least. So, but the age thing is interesting. But I guess that makes sense too. Yeah, but I just never thought about that because that would really suck if you were like fine and then somewhere around 50, you just were like, yeah, I guess I'm gonna start doing heroin. Like, I mean, not that people
Mhm.
don't.
It happens. It does happen, but it's definitely less common. It's something like with each passing year, starting when you're, you know, in your tweens, teens, that you avoid drinking or using substances, your chances of developing addiction later in your life, will reduce by 5%. So if you can like push that initiation or that first exposure to drinking or substance use later,
Yeah.
that helps.
I really, really, when my gambling ramped up, I was probably about 17.
Yeah.
So it was really when I really started I mean, I had gambled before that, but that's when I really got into it hard. And then in college, and I just kind of like took off from there. But that's still developmental, I would say, right? You said 21 was the age you're saying. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's still developmental. I mean, it's a little later. Like if you had started uh, well, did you get into anything else that was like addictive behavior before 17, like alcohol or substance wise, or not so much?
yeah, people will get tired of me saying this on the podcast. I don't think I've never felt that I was addicted to drinking or any drugs, but I have abused alcohol and drugs for sure. Yeah. That's the most succinct way for me to put it.
No
Anymore, I don't
intensity.
really do anything, but it's boring, but or responsible, depending on how you look at it.
Maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah. So yeah, no, when high school I drank like, I remember we were young, probably 14 or 15, and one of my friends parents was out of town, and so they may have not been, they couldn't have been out of town because we were hiding in like the bushes in a park drinking, and they had like taken all the different alcohols and put it into a 2-liter bottle. So we didn't know anything
Mhm.
about alcohol. And you're like, yeah, you just mix it all up, and it was just like put some rum and then some gin and then some mix. Disgusting. It was a disgusting
Must have felt
concoction.
great later.
Oh yeah. Well, we were lying on this hill. I remember we were lying on a hill, like staring at the clouds. So I also, how about this? Not on purpose, but I ate a pot brownie when I was like 9. So
Oh, yikes.
that was,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
yeah, oops.
9 or 10. I was like 9 or 10. I was at a party with my mom as a barbecue in the daytime.
Mhm.
And I didn't eat it, by the way. This woman gave it to me and thought it'd be funny, which I think she'd be put in jail now. Back then,
Yeah,
it was
that's
just
really
like,
messed up.
yeah, this woman gave it to me, thought it'd be funny. I was in the neighborhood. It was a barbecue. I was in the neighborhood of my mom was, divorced from my dad when I was young. So, she didn't have a lot of boyfriends, but there was one boyfriend she had that she no longer had. And I remember that I'm like, oh, his name was Michael. We're in Michael's neighborhood. So I got on my bike, bike to his house. And my mom started freaking out, didn't know where I was at, then went down to his house because we were like 5 doors or 6 doors down and asked if he was here. And he goes, yeah, he got here however long ago. He's just been eating cereal for the last 45 minutes. I was just eating. So my mom got me real because she had heard what happened. I think my mom was not a violent woman. If she was, she probably would have knocked this woman. She was obviously very upset with this woman. And they took my bicycle, put it in the back of the pickup truck that we had. And then my mom and her boyfriend drove me. We're going to drive me home. And I said, hold on 1 second. I jumped out of the truck. This is being retold to me, this story, by the way. I jumped,
Mhm.
ran to get a plate of food and brought the food back in. Like, I was so hungry.
Oh, that
And then
urge is so strong. Wow.
and then my mom, she was such a good person. She was like, okay. My mom had, smoked pot at that point. And she goes, all right, what would I want to do? So she goes, all right, what do you want to do do you want to go for a bike ride? And he goes, and I go, yeah. So we took a bike ride to a park again, sat in the grass and just hung out, and then kind of was chilling out. And then I told my mom, sorry that I'm taking this long, sorry, but I told my mom, I said, I want to get ice cream. And my mom was like, oh, I didn't bring any money with me. This is like, it's early 80s. You're not carrying around credit cards. And somehow I was already in a life of crime. She didn't even know where I produced a $10 bill. I was like, I've got money. And she was like, what? And we went and got ice cream. And then I passed out for like a day, she said. So
Wow.
I don't know if that formed my addiction in my brain, but I don't think it was good for
Well, it
me.
didn't help.
Yeah.
It definitely didn't help.
Okay. So we're blaming my grandfather, this woman. I don't know her name.
Yeah,
And
we've got a whole list.
yeah. All right. Took it off the rails there. Are there any, oh, you talked about this, all right. You've already covered a lot of stuff. Are there any biological signals that someone's more vulnerable to addiction, genetics, trauma, stress, biology? But you kind of covered that. And trauma, I always think would be a big one, and genetics.
So there's also the way that your body responds initially to being exposed to alcohol or other substances. So genetic researchers have found that this is sort of a genetic marker of vulnerability when it doesn't really do much to you or for you the first time you're exposed to alcohol. It's almost like your body's already has this built-in tolerance, so you're going to have to drink a lot more in order to get the effect that most people get from a little bit the first time. So it's almost like predicting that if you stay on that path, you're going to consume alcohol or other substances in quantities that are going to change your brain chemistry, and it's going to take you more to get there. That sort of responsivity or low responsivity to alcohol or other substances, it predicts genetic vulnerability. And then there's also, um, the whole stress system and the way that it gets tapped in early life. We have like an amazing ability to respond to stressful things happening in our lives and to recover from them and to cope with them. And when that gets tapped a lot in early life, um, that system can get kind of sensitized and it's sort of like in this hyper aroused state that's not very good for you. And then when you take drugs or, when you drink or you use other substances, um, your whole stress response system can start to become impaired because that also stresses your system because then you're going to go if you do it chronically you're going to go into withdrawal, you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have other symptoms that come up as your body's trying to manage the sort of ups and downs of use and withdrawal, um and that makes us a little bit less capable of handling stress in healthy ways when it arises because it's just like this whole complex thing we have to do. We have to like while we're in a stress state, we have to mobilize our body, to fight or flee, what we like naturally do when we're facing some kind of threat. And then we also have to sort of draw on our memory to access ideas about how do I manage this stressor, et cetera. And when you use substances chronically, not only does a lot of stress in early life make you more vulnerable to become addicted, but then as you're becoming addicted, you become like less able to access those healthy coping responses in your mind when you're encountering stress. And that makes you more likely to take drugs to try to counteract the stress, and it can sort of become a vicious cycle. So, and that's part of the biology, is it is tied in with stress.
Yeah. I'm glad you're here. This all makes sense to me. Everything you're saying. I'm like, yeah, I want to go like this the whole time. Yeah, but I don't want to keep doing it because that's bad podcasting in the middle. And sometimes I listen back to the podcast and I do that anyways. And I'm like, shut up, Forrest. But yeah, no, that all makes sense. Everything you're saying.
I'm glad it's resonating. That's good.
Um, Again, some of these questions we might be recovering stuff, but what does craving actually feel like at a neurochemical level, which I think you kind of covered at the beginning, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, one of the ways that we study craving is we study what cues that have come to become like tied to alcohol or drug use, or gambling behavior. Like, what do they do to the brain of somebody with an addiction? Like, what kind of brain changes happen when they're exposed to cues? Because that is that whole learn aspect of addiction we were talking about, is that you start associating certain things with drinking or using, or performing some kind of addictive behavior, and then those things, with or without the substance present, can trigger these very powerful urges to use the substance. So sometimes those are external things, like a place that you usually drink, or a person that you drink with, or um or maybe if if you smoke weed and you're seeing, um well, you see the weed in your house or something like that, that's a trigger, or something that you use to smoke it, or a bong or whatever. Like, those things can evoke those kinds of like urges and temptations. But sometimes it's like more internal states become triggers. So like, when you feel depressed or anxious or nervous, or even when you feel excited. I mean, not everyone's self-medicating. Some people just use substances to make a good feeling great or amazing. So, um, those things all become triggers. And what happens over time is that when you encounter one of those triggers, your brain, almost like a teaser, will release some dopamine, even if you haven't used anything yet. And that dopamine is like a signal to your brain that says, hey, like, want more of that? Doesn't that feel good? Like, that's what you're going to feel like even more if you return to the source of it. Um, and then depending on what kind of addiction you have and how complicated it is for you to acquire what it is you're going to use, right? Like, if it's drinking, maybe it's very readily accessible. If it's opioids, maybe you have to go through a whole sequence of things in order to access a sequence of steps to access opioids. Um, as you're going through that sequence, you kind of like start getting like excited in a way, because you're anticipating you're going to get what your brain is craving and wanting, and that process releases even more dopamine. And so that's there's more going on, but that's a lot of what we
yeah,
see
I,
happening in the brain.
I would, if I was be driving to a casino,
Mhm.
I usually have to call somebody because I want to like just be like, I'm so up. I'm just like, yeah, hey, what's going on? Hey, we should get together, have dinner. Like that kind of. It's almost like what a cokehead would say, like the same kind of thing. Somebody
Yeah.
that's addicted to I don't want it to coke, yeah, but yeah, where they're just like, what's up? Let's solve all the world's problems. Like I definitely would get this big rush before I know I'm going to gamble. I've got a bunch of cash in my pocket and just that, even going to the ATM, it's like all the same kind of action, like what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
The cash is a trigger for you. The
Yeah.
And then that going to the ATM, that's like, someone seeking out their dealer to get their Vicodin or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
that's that's your process that is bringing you closer and closer to experiencing the rush of gambling itself.
Yeah. Still, anytime I have a lot of cash, and I'm telling you, it might not have been until right at this moment that I realized that's why I should have thought that. But like if I took some money out the other day because I had to pay somebody cash, but it was $500 and it came out in all 20s. And and that's just like it's thicker, and that
Yeah.
like there is something psychological about it to me where I'm just like, yeah, let's go do some bad things. Let's go and gambling obviously is the first one, but I mean I have a relationship with food. I've lost a lot of weight recently, but I was
Awesome.
70 plus pounds heavier than this beginning of the year.
How'd you
And
do it?
I I still need to lose about 40, 50 pounds. So the first, it's funny. I don't want to like do bits that I'm doing on stage, but I do say you do it. I was not using Ozempic or any of the GLP ones or anything. So, but, uh, it's funny though, but someone is like, hey, to get now they got that last 40 pounds, you might want to use it. And I'm kind of like, yeah, these last 40, 50 pounds seems to be a lot harder. So I was
Oh,
like, maybe
yeah. It does get
I was so
harder.
against it. And now I'm like, oh, maybe I'll look into it. I was so heavy that honestly, just these simple things. I drank nothing but water pretty much, unless I need a little bit of caffeine and have like a diet soda or a little
Yep.
bit of like just plain coffee or something. Nothing but water for the first 3, 4 months. I didn't eat past 6:30 p.m. And I that was a big one for me because I work late at night and sometimes I'd be getting ready for a show and it's 5, 6, 7 o'clock when you're normally eating dinner. I'm not eating, I'm just getting ready. Then I'm on stage, then I do a second show, then I get on and it's like 11, 12 at night. Then I'm
Wow.
eating some crap. And then I just cut out sugar, just all not processed sugar. No, I barely even ate much fruit because I was like being so psychotic about losing weight that I was like, I'll have an apple because there's a lot of fiber in that. But I cut out mostly sugar and I only had good carbs. If I had any carbs, came in the form of vegetables, um, or maybe like quinoa or something like that. And the first 40 or 50 pounds was like gone. And like to the point where it was so fast that people were like, you're on Ozempic. I'm like, I'm not. I'm just so large that my body was so inflamed. I was just like, yeah, thank you. Just like, thank you so much for not doing this anymore. And then it was just, then working out. I was, doing some workouts and walking a lot, hiking a lot, doing stuff. But now I'm to the point where I'm like, oh, now I got to work even harder. And I was like, that was so much easier then. So,
Yeah, it does get
yeah,
harder, but that's
yeah,
amazing. That's a
yeah.
lot of weight.
But I don't even have any. Oh, money, cash. Yeah, but that's another thing too. I'll have cash. That's how I'll think. I'll be like, look at all this cash. Then we could just go get some. I don't. I have cards I can buy it with, but for some reason the cash is always a trigger for like gambling, food, like any. I don't know. Just it's the possibility of being able to spend on stuff that I shouldn't be like, and it's just in my
Yeah.
hand, and so it's definitely a trigger for me. And because of that, I have a terrible relationship with money. Like I've never respected it, and what I do now, and I don't even know if this is the most healthy thing, is like when I get paid for something and I have a lot of money, is like I just spend it on positive things. Like, okay, let's pay my car insurance 6 months in advance. Let's pay I'm gonna need gas in my car, so I'll go on my Shell account and like a app, and I'll just put $500 of gas on there and stuff. And it's also roadblocks for me to like not to I think it's also good, but it is still comes from this place that I don't know if it's an entirely healthy way to be instead of just being like I'm just going to not spend it. So
Well, but there are worse things. I mean,
yeah.
that's a pretty positive step compared to spending it on gambling, you know?
Sure, but yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'll take that. I'll take it.
Take it. Just take it. I mean, you're a work in progress, so, like, you probably, like, the next stage for you will be to, like, spend some, save some, like, I don't know, like, there's probably, like, a next step for you that would feel better, like, a better
Mhm.
use of it and a
Yeah.
better like, more in control of managing it, but this sounds way more in control than what you were doing before.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and part of it is, I'm single. I've never been married, so when I have other friends that are gambling addicts, they'll just be like, "My wife has control of all my money." And I was like, "Oh, what a dream that would be." Where people say the opposite normally, especially like in comedy and tropes, like my wife doesn't let me spend it. I'm like, oh
Right.
God, I wish. Um, so I put up. I do as many of these kind of activities to prevent that. Like, for instance, I don't have a brick and mortar bank anymore. because I do a lot of shows in Las Vegas. And when I go to Las Vegas, I just make sure, just as an added benefit, let's make sure I don't have a lot of access to money. Just not saying I'm going to gamble, but let's say something happens and there's a trigger and I can't get a hold of somebody that I want to talk to, or whatever other roadblocks I have in there. I just have, and having an online bank, I have SoFi. Shout out SoFi. Maybe you guys want to sponsor me. I don't know, sponsor the podcast, but um, there it sucks because when you deposit a check, they're like, "This will clear in 8 days." You're like, 8 days, I'm like, ugh. And there's a lot of negative things, cons to it. But overall, I'm just like, well, I can't just go to the bank if I don't have that card. I leave the card at home, is my point, and so I can't get the money.
Well, that's
Um,
part of the treatment, like, for gambling addiction is restricting access, you know? I mean,
right.
it kinda similar to with drug and alcohol addiction, like, you don't wanna have tequila in your cupboard if
Yeah,
you're trying not to drink and your drink of choice is tequila shots, you know? I mean, it's harder with money because, you need money to survive, so it's a bit complicated, but restricting access to quick access to money that you can
yeah,
use to gamble on impulse, like that's part of the treatment, so you're just doing it.
yeah. It'd be much easier if the form of currency in this country was cocaine. And I'm not into cocaine. I never have been, but there are people that are addicted to it. But if you had to pay your rent and buy your groceries with cocaine stuff, I'd be fine. There'd be other people that would be terrible for.
Yep.
No, I'm just saying, like, as a, yeah, because that's a terrible analogy. But is it what you said though? Like, you need money to survive and get through this life, and so that's what makes it difficult. And that's a definitely a trigger for me. Um, so what like are is your brain when you're an addict? Is the brain like permanently changed or damaged? Like, can it heal? Like, if let's say you've years and years, maybe you're just a couple years, but even if you were a lot of years as a drug alcoholic, whatever it is, gambler, can the brain repair itself?
Yeah. There's a lot of reason for hope there. There have been more and more studies on that question. Is like, how does the brain recover? How does the brain recover? And in a way, it's like you can't unlearn those connections that you learned in the course of your addiction between using a substance and feeling a certain kind of way, but you can start to relearn about other things that you can do that can bring some of those sensations that you were seeking. And then over time, as those connections start to form, because that is forming connections in your brain and your memory as you're starting to practice doing things that maybe are a little bit like going through motions in the early process of recovery, where you're really, struggling with cravings and wishing you didn't have to end that relationship with the substance. Because I don't know really anybody who, if given the choice to continue drinking, using, gambling, and not have anything negative come of it, like, would be like, "No, I still wanna stop," I mean, we kinda have to it's something you have to face that you have to sort of, like, part ways with. It's a complicated relationship. It's like, something that's become destructive for you, but something that you also loved in a way, or really liked, or really came to depend on, or something like that. Um, so it's tough at first to sort of form those new connections, but as you're learning these new relationships between, new sources of pleasure, but also the sort of sense of control and mastery that you achieve when you're able to every time you're able to successfully resist an urge and make a better choice, and one that you feel like better reflects who you are and what you want out of life. You're like strengthening this new muscle, like both psychologically, but also at a neurobiological level. Um, and as that's happening, I won't say you're unlearning the addictive behaviors, but you're making so many new connections in your brain that you are sort of rewiring your choice behavior and your reasoning and judgment and what's driving you to make the decisions that you're making. So you're sort of like retraining your frontal lobe and the part of your brain that is like the part that has better judgment, um, to be the one in control of making the decisions. And when you do that for long enough, they do see in brain imaging research that there are structural and functional changes in the brain when people have been in recovery for long enough. Um, so, do the effects of chronic alcohol use get and drug use get fully reversed in everybody? Probably not, but you can recover fully. Some people maybe need to continue to take, like, let's say you're on, like, replacement therapy for opioid addiction. Some people, like, can taper down to a certain level, but they still need, like, a small dose over the longer term to keep their brain chemistry stable enough. And this is stable enough not to feel high, it's, like, stable enough to function and not feel strong urges and cravings. So, you could say in somebody who needs medication long term to keep their brain stable, yeah, their brain is not, like, completely recovered on its own. Um, but it's functioning well enough that they can live a meaningful and fulfilling life if they stay the course of their treatment. So it's not like you could say, like, black and white, like, yes, anybody who goes sober completely recovers their brain. But a lot of people do. A lot of people will come back to feeling totally normal. And then some people will maybe need some medication to feel normal, but they can still feel normal and they will recover a large proportion of the functioning, just maybe not completely, depending on how serious their addiction was and how long it went on.
That's good to know. And so it becomes kind of like, I mean, the way you're describing it is, it's just because that's the way it feels. Like I had a really long, when I first stopped gambling, I had a really long stretch where I did not gamble. And it becomes like a faint memory where you still know what it is and you still know what it's like to
Mhm.
do that, but you don't, it's almost like trying to remember somebody's name and that you forget. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's what it was. That's how, at least for me, it was or is, but the longest I had abstained from gambling was the first time I stopped gambling. And then now we're working on this, trying to get past that new record. But it's good to know that because again, I come from a science background. So I always want things. I don't want it to just be like, yeah, sure. Like I want, but
You want the
well,
facts.
yeah, when you're like, we have data, I'm always like, yeah, data. We like data. That's how my brain works. So, um, what actually breaks the addiction cycle, like biologically? I know you've mentioned medication, therapy, or time. I mean, I guess it's all these things, or
I think it's all those things, honestly, because I think, um, like, when you talk about time, like, the further away in time you get from the last time you gambled, it's like you're describing, like, the more stable you are in your kind of motivation and your sense of yourself able to function and be fulfilled and find things to do and, like, without it in your life. So, like, that separation of time, I think it is really important. And it is that time factor that helps us understand how likely you are to return to substance use. Like, it's kind of like cancer. Like, I think when you hit around 5 years, um, the likelihood of returning to addictive behavior is quite low. It's like being in full remission from another illness.
right.
Um, and not that it's high when you're 4 years, away, but, like, with each passing month and year, you get, your risk of returning to the behavior becomes lower and lower. So there is something to time, but, like, what's happening during that time is that your brain is getting sort of rewired. The circuits are reforming, and even the structure and function of certain areas, especially in the frontal area that controls decision making, they start to repair themselves. Um, so, and you see that in studies of what medication does, but you also see that in studies of what therapy does. Like, they've done some brain imaging studies after people receive a course of therapy for addiction, and they start to see changes in the brain in some of those areas that have been impacted by chronic substance use. So I think it's a lot of things working together, but I think it is really important what you do in recovery because they have that sort of concept of the 12-step program of like a like um what is it, like a dry drunk kind of like,
Yeah. No,
like
it's right wrong. Yeah, we've talked about it on this podcast. Yeah, like where you're not drinking, but you're still doing all of the behaviors and you're not all the bad things that came along with your drinking. You're still doing that.
yeah. Yeah, it really matters what you do with that time. So it's not just time.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're not gonna make it to the 4 years unless you're doing the other stuff, really,
Right.
Like, you're gonna yeah. So, yeah, that makes sense. And then, I think I had one more question before oh, dopamine. I have this here. You kinda one of those 2. I just put, "Is dopamine the villain?" But, I don't know, the first thing you started talking about was like, "Hey, we need it to so that we understand what things that are pleasurable in life." Honestly don't know the difference between dopamine and serotonin, and I don't only know these words. I know serotonin because of drug use, when you take ecstasy, it's like releasing all your serotonin and stuff, but, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, is dop so dopamine
Serotonin like helps us stay like calm
mm,
and dopamine makes us feel like elated. That's how I
oh,
would think. Yeah.
okay. Because I remember, like, I don't even know if people do ecstasy. I'm sure I shouldn't say that, sounds so old. Of course, people do ecstasy stuff. I don't know what the level of it is back when, like, with going out to clubs and things like that. That was a big thing growing up in Miami. But everyone's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, it releases all your serotonin at once." And I was like, "Oh, serotonin's great." But I guess it's like that's why your people on ecstasy are like more relaxed. Like it's more like this, um, people love everything, love everybody and stuff. But so
Yeah, you don't, like, love everyone when you, like, use cocaine.
yeah, yeah, true. No, you
In
take
fact, you could go the opposite direction, you can get paranoid and agitated and all of that if
yeah.
if you take too much. Um, so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the, like, overall distinction, like, serotonin kind of regulates anxiety, and dopamine is more centered around pleasure. But, yeah, I mean, dopamine could be a villain if you're releasing too much of it,
Hmm.
um, but you're right, we need it.
Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, you won't know anything. Yeah, that's good. Like when you take a good bite of food, like at a really nice restaurant, that's what, otherwise, we might as well just eat Burger King the rest of our life, like, which is gross. All right. I don't, do you like Burger King? I'm not going to offend you.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh, no. No, I'm not a Burger King type.
the original Burger King is about 1 mile from where I'm sitting. It started in Miami. Another thing
Oh,
that
really?
people will bag on Miami about. Miami is a good city, though. I'm from here. I won't let people disparage it. It's different now.
Miami's nice. Miami's nice.
Um, do I have time to ask you a few questions, gambling specific related?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Um, I saw that you had mentioned this in one of your episodes or talked about it, the gambling NBA scandal. And that's interesting to me. Number 1, because it's gambling. Number 2, NBA is like my favorite sport. And yeah. And so if people don't know, well, I did a solo episode where I talked about it. So if you listen to this podcast, you know about Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier and Damon Jones. Yeah, Damon Jones. And they're all actually, they lumped them all together, but they were for different kind of things. Some of them were supposedly or allegedly taking money to affect outcomes of prop bets and over unders and stuff. And then Chauncey was like in this, or he was involved in this gambling ring. Um, from like an addiction, like science viewpoint, do you think professional athletes are especially like vulnerable to gambling problems or scandals? Because it seems like this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I feel every athlete that I've ever known or even heard, like Charles Barkley famously gambles. There's a lot of gambling that goes on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the risk factors we didn't really talk about was, like, access. Like, when you have access as a young person to addictive substances, and in this case, I know it's hard for people to wrap their head around it sometimes is with gambling because 'cause they're like, "Well, you don't ingest anything, like, you're not putting anything in your body," but we do know that it shares so many, um, like, neural substrates that overlap with, drug and alcohol addiction and, has a similar impact on the reward system, um, and so to the extent that, like, athletes have access to, like, means to enable them to engage in this behavior, I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of the risk.
The money
Um,
you're talking about, like, they have so much money now, right? Yeah.
yeah, and then they have so much money, and then they also, like, are observing this happening in their environment. There is something to this sort of like observational learning, like everyone around me is doing this. I want to get in on it too. And we know for like younger people, one of the risk factors for becoming addicted to drugs and alcohol is if they're exposed to that, like in their neighborhood, in their school, like in an especially intense way in their home, with their parents or their siblings using substances. So to the extent that professional athletes, and they often do get started in their athletic careers young, like, are exposed to a lot of gambling behavior around them. I think that's a part of the risk. Um, but also athletes in general, they end up exposed to addictive substances like opioids, like, more frequently and are more likely to develop an addiction to a non-prescription, opioid than non-athletes, because of it's a core part of managing their injuries, having the expectations of high performance. I did a sort of a reaction, video episode to, Shaquille O'Neal's, recent interview on the Dax Shepard podcast, where he was talking about how he took, um, painkillers to manage, just various injuries, but he came to be, like, psychologically dependent on them in a way where he wasn't sure if he needed them to perform, but he was afraid to not take them
Mm,
case it would make him not perform amazing, like, the words he said was like, I it wasn't good enough to be, like, performing well or to perform good. I had to be great, and I had to be great
yeah.
every time. So I couldn't risk, like, not
Yeah.
being because of some
He
ache or
didn't take it. He thought maybe they might be off that night or something. Like,
yeah.
interesting. I've never seen. I'd like to see that interview. I'll check that out. I'll check out your reaction video too. Alonzo
Yeah, with the
Mourning.
reaction video. I didn't interview him, but Dax Shepard did on the Armchair podcast, and yeah, it'd be interesting
That's
to
what
see.
I meant. I meant
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
podcast, but your reaction to
yeah.
your reaction video to because Alonzo Mourning, who was Alonzo Mourning is another. I don't know how into sports you are, but he was a center in the NBA as well. And
Mhm.
he played for the Miami Heat, among other teams. And he was on this other podcast called All the Smoke, which is like a sports podcast. And he talks about he had a lot of injuries and stuff. And he talks about that same exact, not to that exact lineup, but he actually played with Shaq too for a little while.
Oh,
About
interesting.
the point where he started taking all these painkillers for all these different, and again, says injury management. And then he came to rely on them to the point where he doesn't anymore. But I think it was a big part of their careers. Yeah.
Yeah, so that can happen so easily to professional athletes, and one of the risk factors for gambling addiction is substance addictions. So I think there are like a lot of different ways in which that is kind of a vulnerable population, although there hasn't been like a ton of research on athletes and gambling specifically, or if any.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's there's not a major there's not a big name. Maybe LeBron James, I don't know, but every Michael Jordan obviously is attached to gambling. There's all these conspiracy theories about he left basketball because he owed all his money and he had to play baseball and all that stuff. But he definitely had, in my opinion, I don't know him, but he sounded like he had a gambling problem. I mean, he was ultra competitive, and there's all these stories about him on golf courses playing for astronomical amounts of money. And everyone always says, well, he had so much money. So this, but I'm like, okay. That's just my opinion as a gambler, just watching that. Charles Barkley has self-admittedly said he's had gambling issues. John Daly, as a golfer, that he's talked about it as well. But yeah, that because I always thought like, oh, it's just access to money. Yeah, all this money now. Like you came from nothing, and now you look at your bank account and you're like, well, let's go and yeah. So, but that which is definitely part of it. But yeah, interesting. Um, how would you treat somebody like differently if you're like working with an athlete or an ex athlete who has all this access to money and gambling opportunities? Do you approach that? Would you approach that differently? Like, how would you? Do you? Yeah,
I mean, I think the key elements of the approach should be restricting access. Like, I mean, you can do all the psychological work around what are the negative consequences of this and how's it affecting your life, and trying to help them, a person to become and remain motivated to change the behavior. But ultimately, they're going to be triggered all the time because of the access to a means to gamble. So like, so I think that would be one of the areas of emphasis. I'd have to kinda help them figure out who in their life could they trust to manage their money,
yeah,
and
and that's a whole nother ball. I mean, I started the whole podcast by talking about Shohei Otani and his interpreter, which, by the way, so many people. I mean, I don't know the real story. It seems like that's what really happened. They have recordings of him, to my understanding, calling banks and just talking to people that just heard an Asian voice and were like, "Yeah, I guess it's Shohei Otani. He's saying he is." He also, but there's still some people that say, "Oh no, he did it, and his interpreter took the fall." It's like I don't think he's taking the. He's going to prison for the rest of his life or a chunk
yeah.
of it. Um, but that's just such. Not even just athletes. I know living in LA, and stuff, actors, and I have friends that are big comedians that have had people that they had close to them that they're supposed to be trustworthy that have taken advantage of the situation and stolen from them. So that's got to be pretty brutal. That's
Yeah.
one thing I don't have to worry about. I guess right now is like, but who knows? Maybe I'll be that successful one day. Um, and I also think that the NBA, man, they did this. They did their own investigation into Terry Rozier, and then the FBI, however many longer, like arrested him and said, "Well, now you." And I feel like a lot of these leagues, they're all sponsored now by FanDuel and DraftKings, and that it's like the sponsor of. By the way, I think FanDuel or DraftKings are both of them. They're all leagues. They'll say the NBA is official, whatever, and then they have them both, like NBA, hockey, um, baseball. And so I feel like they're in a really weird predicament. These organizations where they have to kind of like they're looking at, should we protect our players, or are we looking at all this money that's coming in from all these sponsors and stuff? And I feel like they have some responsibility, but I don't think they do protect their players from gambling addiction or that kind of stuff. I don't know.
I mean, to the extent that they have responsibility to protect them from drug addiction as well, I mean, like, what they can do is, like, they can educate them, they can, try to help raise awareness of, like, what are the things to look out for. Like, I think a lot of people don't even realize there's such a thing as gambling addiction, or they don't, like, really wrap their head around it in the same way as alcohol and drug addiction, because you're not, like, putting something inside your body. So it can't be that you really get addicted and maybe it's just mind over matter, or you have to be stronger than that, or, use good judgment or something like that. But actually, like, people do really lose control. In the same way they lose control over alcohol and drugs, they experience cravings, they experience a lot of distress, a lot of shame and guilt, and I mean, a lot of like the whole syndrome, like, it's transplanted in the context of gambling. And if it's possible to provide some education and also just, like, make people aware that there are treatments available, like, those would be the areas of responsibility I would kind of highlight.
Yeah, and maybe they are doing that, and then I don't know that because I'm not a professional athlete. I have a friend of mine that I grew up with. His son is playing in the NFL. He got drafted last year. He's a rookie this year,
Oh, wow.
and I do know that they went to many different. I know they went to a couple conferences. I don't know, for lack of a better word, where they bring in these star players or these future possible star players, and hey, just so you know, people are going to try and get your money from you, or they're going to try and do XYZ. And they also bring the parents in because my friend, I went to the first game. He plays for the Houston Texans. His name is Jaden Higgins, number 81. He's doing great. The first game happened to be against the Rams at SoFi Stadium. So I was just like, wow, cool. I get to go to the game. I met them there. I got to go on the field and watch them. It was awesome. But there was people coming up to him that were just excited, Houston Texan fans, and like, hey, I do like artwork, and I was hoping, and I could see him already like all, not in a bad way, like all these safeguards that he had been going to these. They bring the parents in too, like, hey, people are going to try and take advantage of you and stuff. So I should say that I do know that at least the NFL is, and in some ways, looking out for their players that way. So maybe they have, hopefully, they have other things like that up for addiction and
I
stuff
hope
like
so.
that. Yeah. Okay. Last question. Could the growing legalization and ease of access to sports betting, which has never been easier on your phone,
Yeah.
could it be like fueling scandals like this, do you think? Or is this something that's always happened? And also, do you think, or what, I mean, this is such a broad question, but like for someone like you that's been in this field, is everything we've thought about approaching gambling addiction, how to treat, is it totally different now, like as a public health issue?
Oh, good questions. Well, first of all, is online gambling fueling the problem? On many fronts, yes, because it's that ease of access again. Like it's never been easier. You don't have to get in your car and drive somewhere. You don't have to go to the ATM. Like you don't. I mean, it's it's this cycle that a very rapid reward and reinforcement that makes and that's so easy to repeat. So that
Yeah.
and we're seeing that in jurisdictions where online gambling or online betting are legal. That's where you're seeing more outreach to helplines for gambling related problems. So there's definitely a correlation there. Um, which makes sense. It's like access, opportunity, more people are gonna be doing it, and then out of those people, there's gonna be a proportion of people who really lose control. Um, from a public health standpoint, gambling addiction is, like, especially scary to me because, um, there's something about the way in which it destroys lives through, like, finances is, like, something that leads people to feel a certain despair and shame together that are like a very bad combination and can lead to suicidal behaviors. And it's different. There's definitely an elevated risk of suicidal behaviors in people with alcohol and drug addiction for kind of different reasons though. I mean, like you loosen your inhibitions when you're drinking, so you may do things, that are harmful to yourself that you otherwise wouldn't have felt the courage to do. Um, so it's like your judgment's impaired in a certain way. But I think that like the hopelessness and despair that can get attached to a gambling addiction because of the way that it can destroy your life, it can bring you from being a person who's functioning in the world to a person without means who maybe has destroyed your family's access um, to resources that they need to survive, like the shame, the guilt, the impact of it, like it kind of makes sense, you know, how it ties in with mental health struggles and with self-harm. Um, so we do have really I mean, the good news is that people recover from this just like people recover from drug and alcohol addiction. A lot of what gets publicized, I think, in the media are stories of despair and horrible outcomes and people dying of overdoses and all of that. And that those are real stories and there's a place for them. But less often you hear stories of people recovering from addiction, people recovering from gambling addiction. That's why I'm so glad you're talking so openly about your experience. Um, we do have very effective treatments, and it's not even just psychotherapy. They're like the same medications that work for alcoholism for somebody who's like not responding to behavioral strategies. Um, they can take medication and it will help them like dampen that urge and that craving and that desire to gamble. And it works. So Studies show in like 1 to 2 years, people completely recover from severe gambling addiction.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's what I tell people. Sometimes people will hit me up and ask, and they're just in such a bad place and they feel helpless. And I'm like, it'll be quicker than you think. I mean, this year's almost over. It's like
yep.
this year went quick. So that's if you just think about it like in those terms, you stop doing it. Time has a funny way of just going on, whether you want to do it or not. And if it's going
Yep.
on in a good way, it happens quicker than you think. So, okay. Thank you, Dr. Suzette Glasner, for being here. I really appreciate you being on the podcast and sharing all of your knowledge and putting up with the shadows on my glasses that I just noticed about 10 minutes ago. That I'm like, all right, well, we've already recorded it. So that's how it's going to be. Um, Go and check out Dr. Glassner's podcast on YouTube. The channel is at Dr. Glassner, DrGlasner, or you can go to her website, drglassner.com. All the links are on there for her YouTube, Instagram, her book, addiction, what everyone needs to know. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you to Dr. Glassner for being here. Go and check out her podcast, get her book, support her. And as always, if you are feeling like you might harm yourself, you're feeling suicidal, there are suicide and crisis hotlines in the US and Canada, 988 in the US, 988 in Canada. There's a Wikipedia page, list of suicide crisis lines. That is a list of crisis and help centers by country. So visit that page. While you're there, they're going to ask you to donate some money because it's Wikipedia and it's that time of year. But they do provide, I'm there all the time, and this is a service they provide. That's just a page. I think it's $2.75 they ask for. You don't have to, but reach out to somebody. That's the point. Always reach out to somebody. There is help for you out there. I will see you guys, talk to you guys, whatever the case may be next week. Love y'all.